Greetings and salutations. You are listening to the Into the North podcast, where we take a look at the competitive side of the Commander format, also known as CEDH. I am one of your hosts, Lyndon, aka Noobzors, and today I'm joined by my co-hosts, Matt, aka Null.
Yo.
Reed, aka Sick Robot.
How you doing?
And Morgan, aka Spleenface.
What's up, everyone?
And in this episode, we will be discussing card quality. But before we get into that, what have you guys been up to since the last episode?
Just gaming.
I
Existing.
believe since the last episode, the MLC has started, or would have been around then. And Reed's already clowned on us once, so that's
Off to the
that's
races.
fun.
Nice.
I almost climbed on you twice, but unfortunately Ian had to have the what was it? Free cast bolt to kill Kinnan.
Yeah, I mean, or
had the
you know,
quick 2 feet.
or like Pongo could have just let me draw a card off Heuristic Study rather than
not just immediately slam Notion Thief with a Neoform on the stack.
There was a demonic tutor on the stack.
It actually wasn't. No, it was a diabolic intent for the record.
Or sure,
but
okay, on the stack those are the same
diabolic
card.
intent. Pongo flashes in a Notion Thief as his response, with Morgan having a fish out, right? Or
It was
Study?
Heuristic Study,
Yeah,
whatever.
that's suspect.
And then we almost died, but Ian had the old Mog Salvage.
Nice.
Or was it Thunder? No, it's Thunderclap. It was Thunderclap.
It was Thunderclap, yeah.
Which was rough for him because he was pretty behind there. That game
Yeah,
was
because we were also bullying. Not actually, Ian. We weren't bullying you, but quote unquote bullying with the Forbidden Orchard with him on Magda.
yes, that is a thing that was happening. Yeah, that game got wonky. And then the next game, we just had it all.
Next game just wasn't wonky at all. It was great.
Nice.
Anyways.
Well, I've been watching this show called Severance. Okay, and it's on. You can find it on Apple TV Plus. I think I didn't even know.
Okay, no. You can't shill until somebody explicitly sponsors us to shill for.
No,
the
I mean
show.
this is how you have to find the show.
No,
It's not
I
a shill-
understand.
No. I'm shilling for the show. Shut up. This show is great. Everyone should go try and watch it. Go make time to watch it. It's only 9 episodes. It's not a complete they're clearly setting up for further seasons, but dude, really good show, and it's nice to be excited about a show again. After the biggest letdown that was Game of Thrones, and
Speaking of which,
it's since then it's I haven't been excited for like a kind of a seasonal show like I am for Severance. So yeah, everyone go check it out, and then talk to me in the Discord about it, because I definitely want to talk about it.
yeah, our next gut check poll will be about the episode, so
Yeah.
be careful.
For the next 9 episodes are going to be a gut check specifically about each episode. Yeah, so you guys better watch. Yeah. So without further ado, let's jump into housekeeping. And as always in housekeeping, we give a shout out to our new patrons. So big shout out to Jacob R.
And the JK.
You guys rock.
You rock.
Yeah. Thank you as always to the patrons. You guys help support the show, as we say at the end of every episode.
And cutting in after the fact to give you one more bit of housekeeping before we move on, which is that during the recording of this episode, there was a pretty big storm, and Lyndon wound up losing power, so we had to call off the recording and pick it up a couple days later. So if things feel a little bit disjointed, or some points get dropped, or it feels like we're repeating ourselves, that's why. So thank you for being understanding, and without further ado, I'll return you to the rest of the show uninterrupted.
So, new developments. We've got the Brewers Series Tournament Baldur's Street Brawl. Who wants to talk about that one?
Yeah, sure. So this is coming up on, I believe, June the 10th, but I will just confirm that very quickly. Yes, June the 10th. Oh, sorry, June the 11th. Signups close on June the 10th on the r/competitive EDH Discord. and it's a tournament using commanders that are either from the Commander Legends Baldur's Gate or Streets of New Capenna. And so that'll be really interesting to see, people with all their spicy new brews, with their spicy new commanders. I'm definitely planning on entering. I don't know about anyone else, but
Yeah, maybe it'll give me the impetus to actually finally put together Rocco.
Rafine was Streets of New Capenna, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm like
I don't know.
half
giving away the strategy.
I'm honestly half considering just going like full memes and just building something that no one expects.
Dude, someone's got to play a background. Like,
yeah. I was thinking you need a control, dude. Someone should just be sent into the tournament with Thrasios Tymna, man. Come on.
No, you can't. That's all.
No, I know that should be one
oh,
person.
sure. You just want to.
Yeah.
You just want to see how.
You gotta compare for everything else. That's
No. Here's the real. If you really want to punish people, like being clever and trying new stuff, it's just Cody. That's
yeah.
we're not trying to ruin the tournament, man. We just want a threshold or a benchmark for what they should perform, not ruin everyone's weekend.
And to no one's surprise, they all fell under the benchmark.
There's definitely some cool stuff. I think probably the best choices or the best picks for people are probably going to be like, I think it's like Rafine, Rocco, and then probably Gale plus Scion of Halaster.
I've said this before. I don't know if I've said this on the podcast, but it takes like a couple months now for new spoilers and new sets to feel like real Magic cards to me. So you're listing all these names, and I'm like, these are all custom cards, man. These are real Magic cards.
You know Rocco, you know Rafine. Yeah. It's the Gale sign of it's the you can instance make sorceries out of your bin and sorceries make instance out of your bin, and then Sign of Halaster is the black background that it's whenever you would draw a card or draw your first card each turn. Instead, you look at the top two, put one in your bin, and then draw a card.
Okay.
Oh, nice.
So you just like it's actually just a
is Rocco
really
Rocco's the
black
Naya
deck.
X
What
one,
does
right?
that
Yeah.
cost? 2, 3?
The commanders?
No.
So the background's 2, the commander's 3, so it's a great curve,
Yeah.
and then you just have like a bunch of really good one card win cons in the deck because like
they
any tutor can just be great.
really want you to be curving your background into your commander. Like, they're well costed. It's cool design.
I'm just kind of curious what the new rule is going to be for the Abzan guy, Miracle Lord of Bones. Because as it's written, you can make an enchantment token copy of an instant or sorcery.
Wait, what?
What?
So whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you may exile it. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that card, except it's an enchantment and loses all other card types. So if you have like either an MDFC where the front is an instant or sorcery, or like a manifested instant or sorcery, you make a token that's a copy of that card, except it's an enchantment.
Oopsie.
So make a copy of Lightning Bolt, except it's an enchantment.
Weird.
I mean, it fizzles.
When is the Baldur's Gate set coming out?
Soon.
It's almost fully spoiled, right?
I think it's
released
like, it might be
on
the
the
first
10th of
weekend
June.
Okay.
It's the 10th of June.
Oh, so it's released right as the tournament's happening. That's cool.
So is that release or pre-release?
It is release.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Honestly,
the
I thought
pre-release is the first
the
one.
Neon
Grixis-
Dynasty just came out yesterday, man. I swear. I swear.
Yeah, checks out.
Like, I swear,
Cool.
I don't know, even a couple of years ago, we weren't just getting, like, secret layers every week, but now it's like we are. I don't know.
Oh no,
Yeah, there's-
the
It's
the
too many
pace of content
announcements.
release has certainly increased by a ton recently.
Dude, the perpetual spoiler season is it's not hell, it's just purgatory, you know? It's you're every day you're logging onto Discord and seeing it's like, oh, another spoiler for a set that's like I thought we were still, when is the next set coming? Like, it's just it's too much, man. It's too much. But yeah, let's get into the main topic of the show, which as I said earlier is card quality. Now, it's kind of a broad topic, right? I mean, we're not really answering any particular question about card quality. We're just talking about card quality. So that's kind of what we're going to try with this episode, because we were kind of planning the show, and we're like, okay, card quality. There's some interesting stuff to talk about here, but like, there's no real main kind of like thesis that we're trying to like push or kind of work towards. It's kind of just, let's have a discussion about what each of us thinks card quality is and how it's impactful, and see where that takes us. So yeah, let's start off with the kind of big question, which is, what is card quality?
Yeah, I think
we'll open the floor.
Sure. I think this is a term that gets thrown around a lot with a few different meanings in a few different contexts, and that sometimes creates confusion in terms of what people mean. So I think generally, cards that have high card quality will have high impact on the game state, a decent level of flexibility, and are easy to access, which usually just means they're easy to cast, but it can also, in the context of other cards, can also mean they're easy to find, or they can be recurred, or things like that. But obviously, there's sort of two senses in which we can look at this, and I think we'll get into that a little bit later.
I mean, maybe we should get into them now, because I think they're going to be necessary for how I define card quality.
Sure.
I want to at least touch on them a bit.
Sure. So I guess there's two sorts of ways of looking at it. One is a narrow context in which you're evaluating the card sort of very specifically in the deck it's in the types of game states that deck is looking to achieve, and sort of how it's going to be on average in that sort of situation. So this means that cards that, for example, synergize really strongly with your commander, but maybe aren't good on their own, would have a much higher card quality in a narrow context than they would in a broad context. And in a broad context, you're looking at cards that are just often good. They don't super depend on what your opponents have going on, what you have going on. They're just on average across a variety of different scenarios in a variety of different decks going to be powerful.
So a couple of questions. I just want to get like some clarifying questions on kind of your conception. So for a broad context, card that is high quality, right? So obviously we're looking beyond commander specific and looking, we can extend this to CDH. But you could even extend this, so between like different CDH decks, but you could extend this beyond that, right? To EDH as a whole, or to all, constructed Magic formats as a whole, or even limited if you wanted, about like which cards consistently see play in those kinds of decks for power level reasons, right? So maybe an example might be Black Lotus. Black Lotus would be run in every single deck that could run it, right? Or just about.
Sure.
Now, one thing I was thinking about when I was kind of like, thinking of Black Lotus as an example was that I think people tend, when they use the term card quality, or like this card has high card quality, they don't typically tend to include mana sources or like rituals in that discussion and that category, I guess. Do you think that's appropriate, or do you think that they should be or shouldn't be included? What do you think?
I mean,
well,
okay,
so I think that
and mana sources, I feel like, are very different.
Well, like, I mean, it could be like Black Lotus or Sol Ring, right? Like that's kind of like, I don't think do people say that Sol Ring is a high quality card? Would you say, or? Because I think typically people think when they talk about card quality, usually they're referring to like spells that have a direct impact, or like a creature or a spell or something. Not usually. Like I said, mana sources or rituals.
I think I would consider them to have a high card quality.
I would consider them as well, but I'm curious if they fit under Morgan's definition.
I would say yes, because while obviously like things like mana sources tend to fall off, like there's always someone in every discussion about Sol Ring, there's someone who will say like, oh well, top decking it on turn 8 when you're Hellbent sucks. As if that's like so that is true. I'm not gonna like deny that that's true, but I think that the vast majority of the time when you're drawing a card like Sol Ring, and even more a card like Black Lotus, in most assumed contexts, those cards will be useful. Sol Ring less so. It makes colorless mana and it costs mana to play, so it's not quite as easy. It's not quite as easy to just pass or like just, you know, play it in a turn that you were already going to do something, whereas Black Lotus like only increases your options if you cast it. So I would say that yes, they have decently high card quality, but not necessarily the highest card quality, because there are a bunch of times where they will be redundant, or like a card like Sol Ring in particular, you know, sort of curves awkwardly. And if we look at other mana rocks, I mean, I would say Mana Crypt probably has much higher card quality on average than Sol Ring, just because it's always free to, or
You're
it's
not
free to
denying
weave
your own,
in,
you know, colored mana to cast it.
yeah. And then like I think the life loss being relevant is much less frequently a relevant factor. And yeah, so I would say yes, powerful mana sources I would say do have high card quality, even though they're relatively low on flexibility. I think in most contexts they have high impact, and if they're cheap, high access.
So, kind of maybe I was also thinking about this as you were talking. The term of a deck having a lot of air versus a lot of substance, is that kind of a just the same kind of discussion on card quality with, you know, different terms? Because, you know, you could say that this deck with Black Lotus and all these rituals has a lot of air, right? And then that'd be like, well, is that basically saying it's lacking card quality, or is that like?
I think it depends on the context. Again, like your deck has a lot of air, but no, those kind of airy cards have no particular synergy with your commander or whatever the context is. Then definitely low card quality. But otherwise, like if there are contexts, then absolutely.
Because maybe it's right to frame the kind of the mana sources or rituals. Maybe they don't have necessarily high card quality themselves, but they increase the card quality of cards that they let you cast, something like that. Because right, because they're if you're, you know, a deck full of Black Lotuses doesn't have high card quality, right? But Black Lotus into Chandra 4 in, like, you know, limited or constructed or something on turn 1 is quite strong, right? So like you've increased the card quality of, or the impact of Chandra by using this Black Lotus on it. So it's like it only is card quality, or it's only high card quality when it's in combination with something else, maybe.
Well, so what I would say is that I would say that is abstracted into the impact of a card like Black Lotus, where the impact of Black Lotus is often you're casting an incredibly powerful spell very far ahead of curve. So that is a high impact. Now, obviously, you then have to say, okay, but in a lot of situations, I won't be doing that. If I top deck it when I'm Hellbent, it's very low impact. If I already have 5 lands in my mono red deck, it's probably pretty low impact. So I think, like, a card like Black Lotus, I wouldn't say has, you know, super high card quality. And I think, you know, if you put a ton of cards in a deck, a ton of cards like Black Lotus in a deck, you would start to see a problem at a certain point. Now, like, would I run 8 of them in my CEDH deck? Like, yeah, probably I would. But, you know, would I, because it's just so obscene at its like,
and the fact that, like, your commander is just sort of by default a dump for that mana.
Yeah, I also think that's like an important factor in commander, is that you generally have the context of you have a commander, which increases the value of just consistently making a lot of mana compared to other formats where, like, if you're playing, you know, a Storm deck and your hand is just 5 rituals and you don't have the Mind's Desire or, like, the tutor to go get the Yawgmoth's Will to tutor again and do whatever, then, like, your hand does literally nothing. Whereas, you know, a card like Jeweled Lotus sees play in Commander because,
hey, it also saw Legacy play.
Right, but it exists. A card like Jeweled Lotus is extremely powerful because it exists in a context where it's reasonable to assume that almost all of the time you will have a use for that mana.
Yeah.
And so I think mana sources don't inherently have like low or zero card quality, but I think they also are sort of capped in that you can't just have a deck, with a deck with like 40 Black Lotuses would start to run into problems pretty quickly because
this is so when we talked about in our pre-show and kind of making up these notes about the terminology of narrow context versus broad context card quality, we had hammered out we had tested out a bunch of different terms, and this is what we settled on as like a final agreement. But what you're talking about with Black Lotus kind of sounds like, because to me the way I conceptualize card quality, and I can kind of get into this a bit more in a second, but it's very context dependent, and it's dependent on your, not just like the format you're playing or your commander. Like it can matter all the way down to like, what cards have been previously in the deck, assuming you're building like a deck from like one card at a time, right? Like the first Black Lotus you add, like the first land you add has extremely high card quality, and then as you're adding additional copies, the next copy has lower and lower and lower card quality. So to me, when you're talking about the card quality of mana sources, it sounds like you're trying to kind of abstract away some of that kind of context that would be inherent to like the individual deck construction, and more talk about it kind of like broadly. So like, well, because if you add 40 Black Lotuses, you get kind of diminishing returns, so that kind of impacts the overall card quality of Black Lotus, instead of kind of just looking at the first copy you'd add or something.
Yeah,
is that fair?
Guess I think the way I would put it is that I would say the more assumptions you have to make and the less sort of regular those assumptions are, in order for a card to be good, you need to assume certain things about the conditions. And because like no card does anything on its own, right? Like any spell, if you don't have the mana to cast it,
Street Wraith,
I know,
or whatever.
Sure, but that doesn't do anything unless you're drawing into unless the card you draw off it is useful, right? So basically what you're sort of saying is, okay, how many and how sort of unusual assumptions do I have to make for this card to be good? And so when we look at a card like Black Lotus, it's like, well, you have to have a spell that's like worth it to go neg-1 on card advantage to cast for 3 cheaper. Now that's not, or like some set of spells. That's not a particularly high bar. I think if you look at, even an average 3 or 4 card hand, probably, the Black Lotus is going to be pretty decent, at least up until like, maybe turn 4 or turn 5, especially in Commander where you do have that functional mana sink. So yes, I would say I am trying to abstract away. I'm trying to abstract away the discussion of like what happens when you have 40 Black Lotuses, precisely by sort of saying, what are the sort of contexts where Black Lotus is bad? How often, are you encountering those contexts? And then sort of trying to average that out.
Because to me, I think, and I can use this as a segue into my conception of card quality. It's kind of could you kind of agree that this is a scenario that could happen as a result of your deck and the way you define card quality. Imagine let's think like 60 card or something. So you build a deck of cards that just all have very high kind of, let's say, inherent card quality or whatever, right? So it's abstracted away from the context. They're not super dependent on things. They're just kind of high average card quality. Compare that to a deck that has a bunch more of these more narrow cards, right? That would have on average lower card quality. So maybe it's something like Black Lotuses and some spell to cast off of it. Maybe Chandra 4 is a higher card quality card, so we can pick some other example, whatever, doesn't really matter. And you could compare these two, you could face them head to head, or you could, duel them against a gauntlet of other decks. It's possible that the deck that has higher average card quality is going to perform worse than the other deck, right?
Sure. I mean, there's obviously, when you put yourself in the specific context of what decks you're playing against, then a lot of those evaluations can change.
Sure, but imagine if it's not just specific decks. Imagine it's like a sample of every deck from the meta, right? And you're running it through the gauntlet, all the way down to tier 3, right? You could, according to your definitions, because you're talking more about the specific cards and not how they kind of interact as a whole, it's not weird to say that, the card quality pile could very easily lose to a deck that's not, built in the same way, right? It's like more Black Lotuses, more swingy cards with lower average card quality. That deck still might perform better into the broad meta.
Possibly,
that's not
because
yeah, okay.
I think when you say, I think a good word that we haven't touched on is, like, you said the word swingy, and I think that is also, like, when we're talking about broad context, we're talking about cards that, like, high card quality in a broad context. We're talking about cards that are, like, pretty good in a lot of situations.
Well, we were pre-show, we were talking about distributions, right?
Sure.
So if the distribution is like over every single possible gameplay context for a card, right? So it's like, this is what the power level of the card when it has, in this very specific game state, and you do that across every single possible game state. If the power level is very, like, concentrated around, a similar level, then, it might be like a more narrow distribution, whereas, like, the cards that are swingier might be like have just one massive spike, and then be like dead for the rest of it. But on average, these two different distributions that that look completely different could have the same kind of average power level, right? Just based off the number of occurrences of the different game states.
Yeah, I would say you probably want to weight the game states by sort of how likely they are to exist. But yes, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would even say to a certain point, when, like, the context just gets too narrow, card quality becomes, like, even less important, basically, right? Like, I think card quality is great.
Like the broad concept of card quality.
Yeah. I think it's an important concept to consider, like, generally speaking, when building a deck. But when, let's just say I narrow my context down to, like, Magda, and I'm comparing the card quality of each dwarf, it's like, that's not particularly meaningful to evaluate those cards with that play.
I disagree, and so this can kind of segue me into my conception of card quality, which is and pre-show, or like when we were kind of working out whether or not we want to discuss this topic, I was a bit hesitant because, at least the way I kind of view card quality, I think is kind of inherently uninteresting. I think Morgan's view is more the norm and how people normally do it. But to me, it's like card quality is a card, as you're building a deck from scratch, right? And let's say you've got a particular idea or theme or something that you're trying to meet this deck. So my commander is Magda, and I want to make it as strong as possible. The deck should be 99 cards that are the highest card quality. That's basically how I define card quality, which is the cards that would make the optimized list for the particular idea that you're going for, so they meet whatever stipulations you have. Though those cards should be and obviously we're never going to build a deck, so you can't say that the DDB Magda list or whatever is like the highest card quality, because I mean it's made by a person, and so we're not going to achieve the, like, platonic ideal of card quality in our deck construction. But for me, it's like the first dwarf you add is actually pretty high card quality, because it's, when you're considering the consistency and reliability of having Magda in play and what it does with all the synergies in your deck, I view that as a high quality card. So that's why I think my conception is a bit uninteresting. It's like, the swingy cards like Black Lotus, well, maybe it's bad if you have 40 Black Lotuses or something and nothing to actually cast with them. But when you're looking at just the card quality in the context of Magda, or in EDH, you're only going to have one Black Lotus, so most of the time it's going to be very, very high card quality.
Yeah, I think we actually kind of agree a little bit. Basically, like in this context, it's as you put it, I guess, uninteresting. Which is why I brought up Magda in the first place. Like, once it gets to the point where it's just so obvious how good the card is in a particular context, and especially when it comes to your commander, like that influences the rest of possible like ways to kind of narrow it down, right? Then it's just not useful anymore. It's like
I just think it's actually not useful to talk about cards outside of context, to try and abstract away the context. It's like, we could debate, and people have debated, what's the strongest card in Magic ever printed, right? And there's a fun little cheeky argument about Lurrus, because Lurrus has been banned from basically every single format, and it's also been banned after being errated to cost 3 more mana. So yeah, it's like, that could maybe be one of the strongest Magic cards ever printed. But Lurrus is only powerful when you consider the context that it requires to build it, right? Like, you have to do certain concessions to build a Lurrus deck. So if you're looking at Lurrus in the abstract, it's like, okay, well, this card, if it can't be my companion, then it's kind of stinky. Well, it's not stinky, but it's like, it's not as good, but it's not terrible either. But yeah, you need the context to kind of really evaluate the card. Talking about a card independent of context, like, yeah, Oko is a great card, kind of more or less independent of context, but it's still better and worse. It still fluctuates depending on the deck it's in, right? So, like, you should still... It's possible that even though Oko is, like, one of the best cards ever, that, in your, let's say, mono white deck, the next white draw, the next, cheap white creature is going to be better than Oko because of the context. Like, it just doesn't... To me, it doesn't make sense to ignore context when evaluating cards.
So yeah, this is why I think this is why I was sort of trying to come up with a definition that doesn't say we're ignoring context, because, yeah, obviously, in a true vacuum, no Magic card does anything.
Yeah, no. So, but I'm more saying there's no point in looking even in the broader context. There's no point in saying, Abrupt Decay, unless you're dealing with, like, bans, right? Unless you're trying to manage something like, I want to ban this card because it's too prevalent in a bunch of decks and it's leading to, like, same gameplay patterns across a bunch of different decks. Or maybe the power level is too high or something for the format that we're trying to curate. But, like, who cares that Oko is, like, a strong card overall? What I care about it is whether or not it's strong in the deck that I'm trying to make.
So, yeah, I actually agree somewhat that I think the concept of broad card quality isn't actually a particularly useful one. Which I think is sort of... Seeing as I think that is what people mean when they say card quality, and it is used, I think that's sort of why I wanted to talk about it, because I think at least to a degree, you're right that a lot of hay is actually made about card quality that maybe doesn't make a lot of sense, when we start to think about it. Putting cards that are, like, just generically good, but making your deck, slower and more clunky, in order to do it. Like, sure, you're not actually making anything better, by doing that.
Yeah.
And so, I guess I would say your conception of card quality is useful, but not particularly interesting. Yeah. And the broad context, I think, is interesting but not particularly useful.
Yeah, exactly. It's a fun conversation topic to talk about what the strongest Magic card ever printed was, or if Oko is better than Lurrus. But it's not useful, really, at all.
I think there's there's a point where you can kind of get fun and useful, and actually, I think it's kind of specific to CEDH in some ways, but in CEDH, I feel like there actually are some broad contexts, like broad enough contexts that come up very frequently just based on how the game is played in this format. And every deck basically needs to compete in these contexts. So like an example is, I think a very common context is someone's trying to win and another player has open mana. Like there were cards that like are very good in that particular context, and that's a pretty broad context. And I think most decks basically have to play to that game.
But even then, you're still when you're evaluating a card for your deck, right? You're saying, what are the common contexts that I'm going to run into, and is this card going to be good in them? So some cards certainly are good across in multiple decks because they are just kind of independently good in these contexts and aren't actively synergistic with your commander or something. But even then, you're still just doing the same thing, which is looking at your commander and your strategy, and you're still performing the evaluation with all the other contexts and not just looking at that more broad context. Right, like even when in order to make it useful, you have to still incorporate the more narrow context around your individual deck or your personal meta or whatever.
Well, I guess it saves you from literally looking at every single card every single time you want to make a new deck. Right?
Yeah. No, there's certainly some shorthands, right? Like you can make a short list of cards that are, common players, and maybe that's sort of, I don't even necessarily think that's useful, because I think it leads to stapleitis, right? Where people are like, well, why isn't this deck running all of these staples? It's like, well, you need to evaluate the staple individually every time when you're going to the deck. Again, I mean, you can build a functional deck without doing that. You can just build staple pile and not have to think about every card individually. But if you're trying to optimize, you really should be looking at every card individually.
Yeah, but that being said, I think so you can basically approach it from two ways, right? You can you could try to start with the broad contexts, which is kind of basically my argument, or you can start with the very narrow ones. And I think if you start with the broader context and then introduce basically one condition, let's just say it's Magda, you're overall asking fewer questions when you build your deck. Like you're basically asking fewer questions per card when you build your deck. Where in the opposite sense, you have to consider so much for a particular card. I feel like you couldn't be productive as a deck builder. I couldn't imagine being productive as a deck builder. Justifying every single narrow context every single time I have to put a card in the deck.
Well, you certainly don't justify every single narrow context, right? If we're talking about the throwback to kind of the distributions discussion, where Morgan said the scenarios are weighted based on their prevalence, right? To me, it'd be something very similar here, where you're just you're only evaluating the extremely common context. You can't, otherwise we'd be perfect deck builders if we could evaluate every single context.
Wait, are you saying we're not?
Yeah. I mean, wait a second.
So,
yeah, actually,
so
if you want to see perfect deck lists, you can check out our Mox field.
I think something else that sort of goes in this evaluation is that I think maybe a misconception here is that Lyndon's telling you to do all of this in the initial building of the deck, whereas the actual answer to how this iteration happens is that typically you put together an initial version of the deck, and then actually playing games is part of the deck building process, and then those games inform what cards you need to look at to be okay, is this actually a staple in this deck?
Well, everything in deck building is a question, right? Or it's a hypothetical or a hypothesis, I guess is a better word.
Right, but I'm saying is that what I'm saying is that you don't do all of this evaluation in a vacuum in just I'm just deck building and I'm never going to play a game with this deck. I'm just trying to get it to the best that it can be without actually playing any games. It's no, you're gonna build an initial version of the deck based on whatever your personal deck building process is, and then part of the process is that there are external factors that make you reconsider quote unquote staples.
Well, I think that it really is just becoming more informed as a player is what's happening when you're testing, right? There's right. It's a practical concession, not a
but it also gives you the specific contexts for that.
Exactly.
Deck
Yeah,
that
it tells
that are
you what
more
the
likely.
contexts that are actually you're gonna run into are. Yeah, that you
Guys,
should
come
be
on.
considering.
You missed the part where we said we're the perfect deck builders. Who needs to play decks when we already know that they're great?
So, Reed, what's your kind of takes on card quality?
I personally, I think the term is I think card quality is a great descriptor for like an existing deck list. I'm not a particularly huge fan of using it to actually describe individual cards. Like in that I would say, like, I wouldn't say that a given card is a high quality card. That just sounds wrong to me. I would say that a deck has high card quality.
So that's actually kind of interesting because I was also thinking about, because to me every deck should be a card quality pile. It should be the highest possible card quality within its constraints, like I said earlier. But one thing that I was thinking about, what really differentiates, because I understand what someone means. Oh, I've got this card quality pile. I know exactly what they mean, right? Even though that doesn't align with my definition necessarily.
Yeah.
And what I think that is I think it's just,
yeah.
it means that their card quality, all it's talking about is the distribution, the shape of the distribution for the card quality within their deck, right? So a card quality pile is a very kind of more consistent, narrow distribution, right?
Yeah, which is sort of where another differentiating factor comes in, where like, because it's sort of like this cascading effect of like I feel like probably you guys have defined card quality in a way such that you can apply a metric of card quality to an individual card on its own, and then like apply context to that and get scores out of it at the other end, or just like a rough, like not even like necessarily scores or like anything like that, but like you could in each of your I guess specifically yours and Morgan's definitions, you could theoretically like derive the quality of a card from a set of circumstances. Whereas
at least like
sort of
you could
like,
at least hierarchically place one above another.
Sort of where I function from is just like it's not, the cards don't make the quality, the deck makes the quality together. Which means that like I don't really have the same view of like every deck is a high card quality deck, because it's more like, for me it's like, well, the card quality of a deck is like more like less about like the individual, well, this card is powerful in like this deck, this card is powerful in this deck, this card is powerful in this deck. And it's more about like, just if you just draw like any of these cards at like in like any reasonable situation, just like how applicable is it, like are you actually like willing to cast this card, can you cast this card, does it like put you ahead in game plan, rather than like specific synergies. So like a deck full of card draw, ramp removal, and like a very limited win con package is a high card quality deck to me, whereas like a deck that heavily relies on synergies for its cards to actually do things would not be a high card quality deck to me.
But so that doesn't sound necessarily different. It just sounds like very similar to what Morgan was describing. Right? You just said that it only applies to the entire deck, though. I do kind of want to like, I want to get a bit of like Ship of Theseus on you here, and like,
yeah, sure. What's up?
How do you like, if the deck is what has high card quality and none of the cards, like you start plucking away individual cards from the deck, at what point,
right,
like you eventually you're taking away things that are high card quality and that are giving the deck the high card quality, right?
Right, and then it stops being high card quality when you take those cards out of it.
Yeah,
like,
so
if
then those cards are the high card quality cards
in that deck. Yes.
But you don't
if
think
that makes
and
sense.
so you don't think that's they're kind of like, those are the kind of cards that people would call high. Oh my god, this is a tongue twister. High card quality in other decks, right? Like you start taking out. So you said it's ramp, card draw, interaction.
Those were mostly just examples, but like just.
I mean,
like,
those are good broad categories.
Well, no,
right?
I was sort of describing what I would call a high card quality deck. Which like the prototypical example of is obviously like Thrastimna, but
So if you took all the counter spells out of that deck, is it high card quality?
Yeah, I mean it could still be high card quality, sure. It like depends on what you're replacing them with, right? Like
it's just a 80 card deck or 90 card deck or whatever.
Sure, yeah, fine. It's still high card quality. You can basically strip most of this stuff out of like it's hard when you're like not replacing
What
it
is
with
what is
anything, right?
what have you removed? So what is left that isn't a high card quality pile? So obviously, if it's just completely non-functional, right? If you take out all the lands,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
next
like
one-
the lands it ceases. Well, no, I wouldn't. If you took all the lands out of a Thrasios Tymna deck, I wouldn't call that not high card quality. I would call it not a deck.
yeah, I mean that's certainly fair.
Wait, Reed, I'm curious. Under your definition, are
Yeah.
mana dorks generally high card quality?
No, I think probably ramp would reduce card quality in general. Yeah, actually, probably saying ramp during that initial descriptor of a deck was probably a bad idea. But yeah, for the most part, like I wouldn't call ramp high card quality. Like for the most part, here I'll give you a much more narrow definition.
That's
It's
so
like
insane to me.
a hard
That
quality.
is also insane to me.
a high,
Matt, yeah.
yeah, a high.
Like-
in my opinion, a high card quality deck is a deck where basically a large number of your cards produce 2-for-1s or greater.
Okay, that feels way too.
But almost
narrow.
nothing produces 2-for-1s in.
So like, yeah,
CEDH.
like
but like the CDH equivalent of a 2-for-1, like it produces value outside of itself.
Okay, but then how does?
yeah, I don't know.
Like it
That is
produces
so
like
abstract.
it
or
produces,
like
like,
you're
card
losing.
like
losing the
advantage
forest through the
outside of
trees
itself.
here.
So what do you mean by
It's too
outside?
outside
So like,
for Linden.
so like most interaction is low card quality.
Yeah. So this is where like my internal definition gets a bit weird in that like I wouldn't call interaction high card quality, but I would call it like required for a deck to function.
What?
Like I think that like you like card quality and the goodness of a deck are probably separate, where like you can have a very high card quality deck that sucks because it doesn't play a lot of the cards that you just need to play in order to be competitive in CDH.
Is this finally the episode that gets Lyndon and I agreeing that Reed's take is whack?
Yeah,
No, but
probably.
that was your take as well, Morgan,
Wait,
right? Because I'd said the. No, that's not not your take identically, but
Morgan
we'd
can't
kind of
have a
agreed
whack
that you can have a deck that has high card quality that's less powerful than the more synergistic build, right? And then we kind of said that it was like
Yeah, no,
like,
that-
I
that's not-
agree with that.
That's
I
not the
agree with
part
that
that's whack
conclusion,
about Reed's
but-
take.
Yeah, yeah. There you go.
Are you what do you think is whack?
So the
specifically?
whack
Because-
part is that the interaction
Is
low
that
card
it's
quality.
low card quality? It's just necessary for it to function
Yeah.
or be a deck. I think is
Yeah.
No, that is interaction being no. There is. I find a lot of Reed's takes on this particular subject to be actually completely whack.
Yeah, because it's also because I don't really like I don't really use like card quality as a term like internally when I'm describing things.
I mean, I think that's something
Okay,
that we've
so
kind of
a
like
one
pointed
mana-
out that card quality is like you can define it and like it's just not. It's not a particularly useful term, right? It's not a very informative term. You're not going to get a lot
Yeah,
out of it,
yeah. That's sort of like it's sort of where I end up with it, where like I know a card quality deck when I see it and I'll call it that, but it's really more of a descriptor than like a
Okay.
like it's a descriptive term rather than a prescriptive term, and I really don't use it in a productive manner when I'm actually discussing card evaluation or deck
Okay.
evaluation with people.
Try this on for size. I think actually a lot of the problem with the usage of the term card quality is that like people have often used it to mean the sort of broad context card quality, like Reed's example of a high card quality deck is like Thrasios Tymna. And when that discourse was being developed, that deck was also just really good, right? Like Thrasios Tymna mid-range was really good, and
Yeah.
it had what people generally agree to be high card quality. And so now people use high card quality like with the implication that that means it's good, and that's not necessarily true. Like, I'm not saying Thrasios Tymna
Yeah.
mid-range is a bad deck, but like at the time it
Often I think
was arguably like some variant of Thrasios Tymna was almost certainly the best deck, and like that sort of card quality pile, people have now assumed that anything that you can describe as a card quality pile must be like that.
but I also think that like people have been calling things card quality piles way before Thrasios Tymna. It's not like this is a new term that's exclusive to CDH, right? People have been applying the same term to decks for a lot longer than, CDH has been around. One thing I think that's maybe kind of interesting in the context of how people use it in CDH and maybe how they use it more broadly is that I think it's often shorthanded to just be like, this deck doesn't have a lot of dead cards. Like, what makes Thrasios Tymna such a high card quality deck? Well, it's got a really efficient win condition package in Consult Oracle.
I mean,
Right? Which means you can
that's
put
probably
cards that are like more, that aren't dedicated to making you win, that are like, oh, I want to put these cards in because they're good, they're efficient interaction, or they're good value engines, or they're cards you want to run because you want to run them, not because you have to run them for your win condition package.
I
like,
guess
Gitrog
it's not-
Titans
probably
are
the
not,
closest.
you have to run them. They're not
but
high
like,
card quality.
I don't know.
They're
That
dead.
it's like sort of I don't like use it like it has like efficient win cons, so you can use that space for other stuff, because like almost every color has like card efficient win cons that it can play that like make space for card quality. Like,
But I mean, also, I think one of the things is that the efficient win cons in this case also happen to not be like terrible, right? Like,
But-
I mean,
but,
and also
like,
some decks,
okay,
and
but you
often
can
lots
also-
of decks
you
are
can also
running
play, like,
more,
Kinnan Monolith or Isochron Reversal, Dramatic Reversal, or
but
like-
they're also less colors, which means you have less options to choose from for your high quality cards, right?
No, I think he's saying like as your win con in Thrasios Tymna.
no.
But
Yeah.
I
see.
wouldn't say
Yeah.
that.
But Kinnan and Basalt are less high card quality than
I mean-
Oracle Consult, right?
Okay, well, no, we're not getting into this discussion.
Sorry,
Yeah,
we're
no,
not.
no,
I
sorry.
think, but I think it's an irrelevant discussion because, like, if the other 96 cards are
Yeah.
the same, it's still roughly the same card quality. No, like, unless
Sure. I wouldn't say that the deck is suddenly not a card quality pile because you're running Kinnan Basalt, but I mean, I think it also helps with Thoracle that you are running very few dead cards because,
Right, but Kinnan Basalt runs the same amount of dead cards, is what I'm saying. I don't like defining the card qualityness of a pile by the win cons. Like, that's not. It's all the
Well,
cards
that
surrounding.
that
the
wasn't
win
No,
what
I
I
thought
was
it was
insinuating.
the number of dead
But,
cards
yeah.
involved in the win con. Like, Kinnan Basalt isn't like much better or worse in terms of card quality than Oracle Consult. But like
number
if
of
you're
cards in the
running
win con package, sure.
like an Allurin chain that has like where you're playing like a 5 or 6 card package that wins you the game with a recruiter,
Like
or
Vanifar is a
whatever,
good example,
like,
yeah.
then that's lower card quality, and it's purely just about the amount of cards. Really, it's about the amount of cards that you can't replace without you can't replace with a card that doesn't have a similar effect. Like, you can replace Mana Drain with
Yeah.
a removal spell or another tutor or whatever, and the deck still functions. Like, you can replace Thoracle with Lab Man or Jace, sure, but, like, that's a similar effect. And with the Titans and Gitrog, yeah, obviously if they printed better shufflers, then you'd play those. But you can't replace them with, like, the next removal spell or the next tutor. Like, the deck straight up just ceases to function.
Yeah, and so this is again, this isn't necessarily how I view card quality. I think this is just might be how people kind of use the term. And again, I think I mentioned earlier, but people aren't using the term and defining everything super rigorously and then coming to common ground when they're talking about it. It's like that's not how communication works, right? People use terms and there's kind of like a nebulous meaning that's derived from how people interpret it as a collective or whatever, right? And I think that's part of how people are using it, which is just more or less referring to the amount of dead cards in the deck, and then also partially how many colors your deck has, because then you get access to more cards to kind of instead of just running lightning bolts, if you're in mono red, you can run actual good removal spells, just as an example.
I think I would make a slight alteration to your wording. Like, rather than saying the fewest dead cards, I'd probably say the most active cards. Slight difference.
To me, it's like same difference, right?
I actually I do think there is a
think 'cause
distinction there.
When you think about it as the few dead cards, you're kind of like vacuuming the card, where when you say it kind of the most active cards, then you're also kind of taking into account the synergy a little bit. It's like
I think
subtle.
calling
Okay,
like
sure.
few as dead cards is also kind of a binary distinction. Like a card is either dead or it's not, whereas most active is more of a gradient, where like dead cards are obviously the least active, but there's still nuance in cards that aren't dead that can be more or less active.
But this feels like we're just substituting active. If we're trying to talk about the gradients of how active a card is, it just feels like we're substituting in the word active for card quality, which is just like a circular definition at that point, right?
Well, active like relates a bit more to the game in a playstyle way than quality does, right? Like you can like active is more of an intuitive word, at least in my mind, than quality.
I think it's probably a better term, certainly, in the context of looking at a game of Magic and a card being active. That certainly makes sense and as a better term to use than card quality. But I feel like the term card quality and active are serving the same purpose here, even if active is a better descriptor.
Yeah, agreed.
But yeah, so that was Reed's point. Matt, did you have any differences, or where do you kind of fall on this card quality alignment chart?
Honestly, saying the most active cards in your deck is probably the closest you'll get to what my actual thought of it is. I would say basically like I'd probably go more into active and basically say like there's a bunch of kind of mini games in a game of CDH, like your opening hand, choosing your opening hand, your first couple turns trying to combo, like being in a stacks board, like those very probable outcomes in a game where you would basically judge your card as being active in all these different scenarios.
Isn't this kind of like quadrant theory? I've heard this before from I think it was like I heard this on the Command Zone years ago, and they were referencing like I think some pro player who had outlined this theory about like opening hand, early game, mid game, late game, or like when you're behind the head at parity or something like that. Which is and
even the plethora of like minute little scenarios, like the opponent to your left has more mana or has open mana, and you're trying to combo basically, right? And I think you obviously can't like gather and consider all of these contexts, but you can take extremely large portions, and I think that's where most people intuitively derive quality, and it's like in the vast large portions, like especially choosing your opening hand, like you can very easily attribute quality to how well a card works that way. That's why I think ramp is high quality, because your opening hand is like such an important part of the game, such a like
so these,
as far as contributing to your win, it's like one of the biggest.
These scenarios or micro games are all weighted then, right? You're weighting different things differently, right?
Yeah. And it could depend on the deck, which is obviously unique to CEDH because you get a starting set of
So
cards.
then would you say, because you would say a card is more or less active, as a depending on the you could say one card is more active than another, based off how the kind of all these different scenarios weighted, for whatever they should be weighted, how active it is in each of these. So you could kind of do that. You could
I think so.
Okay, so then like we're basically in
when
agreement
I build
on
the deck.
I think our definitions of card quality basically. Okay.
Yeah.
Right
Nice.
on. So now that we've laid everyone's individual definitions, let's talk about how important card quality is. I guess we've defined it. Let's is it applicable? And I feel like we've already sort of answered this in saying that the way that people use it, at least I think most of us are on the same page that the way people use it is not very useful. But if we're using our own definitions of card quality, how important is it? So I'll start with myself. I think card quality is the most important thing because, I think every deck should be trying to maximize its card quality. Every deck should be a card quality pile of the highest quality cards possible. So yeah, it's quite important. But how useful is it to consider card quality as people broadly put it? I don't think that useful. Maybe just as like a heuristic to come up with a list of cards that are generally pretty good and applicable in lots of different scenarios.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I can go next, I suppose. I think I largely agree. I would just add, and I've already mentioned this, that it's also pretty important to be like an efficient deck builder, because then you don't have to reconsider the whole pool of cards again. But you are, as Lyndon said, trying to strive for like the card quality pile.
Mm-hmm. Morgan, Reed.
So I think actually partially the discourse around card quality, because there was a time when that was like how people tried to flex almost in the CH community, and I think it might have been a little bit more important when the community was as a whole was like a little bit less mature in its brewing, and I think you saw people with like very expansive WinCon packages or like synergy pieces that were kind of just a pipe dream, or things like that, where the idea of going, okay, what is it that's actually necessary for this deck to sort of function, and then the rest you can replace with stuff that's easy to use, more interaction, more tutors and card draw and ramp and things like that. That was an important step that had to happen. I think if you look at CDH decks circa 2015, there are a lot of cards in there that you go like, that can't be right. Or maybe earlier, but not that long ago. And I think it's become a little bit less relevant as these heuristics are now like more ingrained. People understand like, okay, how do I build my WinCon package? Focusing on keeping the number of cards in my WinCon package down to a minimum effective amount is actually important and something I have to consider. So yes, it is important, but I think it's now become more a matter of habit that doesn't need to be addressed as explicitly.
I do think, regarding WinCon packages and stuff, that people, I mean, obviously it's a very tough thing to balance. Like if you're trying to draw them, if you need to draw your win condition naturally, having the right amount of density of ways to find it. So if you're in black, you've got enough tutors, so you probably don't need to go super deep on redundancy. Maybe you want a redundant win condition in case one of your pieces gets exiled or something, but I see some people like talking about like triple redundancy for win conditions, or like running things like Rift Sweeper as like, oh, what if my thing gets extracted or gets like I get wheeled and then DRS'd or something. It's like, guys, relax. I think there's people are leaning too much into that often, and really, yeah, it is about maintaining a tight, not super redundant, not too redundant win condition package. But it does vary deck to deck, right? If you have a Magda in the command zone where you're tutoring your win condition, it's pretty easy to just make your win condition package super tight and not run a ton of A plus Bs. Like I think the kind of throwback to the 2015, as you were talking about, there was like 3 or 4 A plus B combos in some decks, right? Like people were running at so many A plus Bs, and then we got into the era of like, oh, like the layered combos, right? I mean, layering is a really important aspect to incorporate redundancy, or make your deck more resilient to removal. If you have 3 pieces that each mutually form like an A plus B, well, that's better than running 2 separate A plus Bs, right? So that was a kind of evolution in reducing and tightening the win condition package, and then kind of overall increasing the card quality. But it is definitely still, like, from a deck building perspective, not trivial to kind of figure out how much of how deep you want to go into kind of redundancy and whatnot.
I think a lot of that though is also just the immaturity of the CH community in terms of building decks to actually win games or have a high win percentage. Unfortunately, like it's sort of a separate problem, but I think a lot of that is actually like more due to a lot of people, and this isn't a dig at anybody in the CDH community or anything. It's just like there are, I think, principles from especially like building decks for like competitive 1v1 Magic in a lot of ways that haven't fully been accepted by a lot of people who are building CDH decks. I mean, rightfully so if they're not like building it for tournament metas or like whatever, like leagues or something. But just the idea that you don't have to have an out to everything, or the idea that you can just have losing matchups and that's okay, is like I'm not sure that's sort of fully set yet into the collective consciousness of the CH meta. Like just the idea that like there are some matchups for a deck or some situations for a deck even, which I think is probably more apt for CDH, where it's like, yeah, I mean, if I play like the example being like in like a 1v1 format, it's like, yeah, I just lose to burn. I'm not even wasting deck slots trying to shore up that matchup. There's nothing in the sideboard for it. I just lose to it. And I don't think there's that level of acceptance yet in the CDH community at large.
Well, I think a lot of it comes
yeah,
down
like
to
I just
waiting
lose
things,
to this.
right?
I just lose to this situation. Like I'm not gonna put cards into my deck to try to like weigh against that. I lose to it. I just accept that, and I'm just gonna play the game and hope that I don't run into that situation.
See, I think
because
that's
rare enough.
advice that isn't actually particularly applicable to CEDH. Like, conceptually, yes. Should you have an out to, like, literally absolutely everything in your deck? No, of course not. But I think that it's, like, kind of dangerous to compare something like a matchup and how little variance there is in that in 60 card to, like, the situations of CEDH.
Oh, so I certainly think that there's a larger window of playable cards in CDH in terms of like there's more wiggle room for including like silver bullets and cards that are good in specific situations just to get yourself out of them. But I do think that like a lot of the community is still at a point of like, yeah, and I need an out to this, and I need an out to this, and what if I get wheeled and then
well
like,
so
the
I
rest
think
of
in
pieces played,
CDH it's less
like
about
Lennon
matchups
said.
and more about specific
Well,
situations.
that's what I was
that's
what I was saying is that like it doesn't like the matchup stuff doesn't transfer directly, but it's sort of like it's similar in the way that like you can have sort of a set of common situations that come up in a set of like uncommon situations, and sometimes you just sort of have to concede that some of the uncommon situations you just lose to.
Yeah, like a stacks piece plus Sylvan Safekeeper. You know, not many people are running board wipes, or at least people are running less board wipes now than they used to years ago. So, you know, that's a situation that, you know, you won't be able to address in your deck potentially. And, you know, that sucks. But if that's something you're not going to run into all that often, then you shouldn't be putting in cards specifically for that. But, you know, if that is something that you run into often, or you're like, I want to target creature decks, you know, then run Deluge. You know,
I play with Reed, so.
Oh my god. Oh yeah,
Must be
yeah.
nice.
Cool. So we've talked about broad context and narrow context card quality. But what about kind of just more other generic contexts in terms of card quality? Is there anything else worth discussing here? I mean, we can cut this because I feel like some of this stuff was probably touched on.
Yeah.
But what about card quality in my ad nauseam deck? Okay, so I've reduced the CMC down to total CMC down to 5. Okay, I only have ad nauseam.
No, 6. Right? You need the ad nauseam.
I can draw my whole deck.
Yeah, you need the mana bond.
It's 6 because it's ad bond. Yeah. Yeah. To put in all the gates plus Deserted Temple, and then untap the Base's End and retap it. Which for the record, I don't know if we're gonna keep this in the episode. For the record, I did ping Shaper about earlier because we had a discussion a couple of days ago about he was like, Yeah, I'll update Adbond Nano or Adbond when we get like an actual land-based WinCon, and they officially spoiled the rest of the gates today. It's just like, hey, Shaper land-based WinCon, get on it.
But I mean, you could already do that, right? Isn't there already? There's enough gates.
Yeah, but the gates sort of sucked, and the new ones are much better for
they
what
are
they
much
do.
better.
New ones are way better.
Dude, that one treasure gate.
It's actually awesome.
Sick. But yeah, so I don't think we're everything else under the context.
Nope.
Anyone care about?
Yeah, I think we're good.
No. And then is there any other kind of like super points that we want to talk about or address?
Nope. This is what I was saying. I think we actually mostly wrap up after we all get our opinions out and sort of do a wrap up here, because I think we're pretty much good to just move into gut checks and listener questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we've defined card quality and we've talked about how important it is. But honestly, there's not too much left for us to give our opinions on, or at least, we kind of conferred, and there was that's kind of it for what we wanted to talk about. If any of the listeners have want us to address further points or want to kind of carry on this discussion, we'd all be happy to on our Discord server. The invite link for which is in the YouTube/podcast description. So definitely join and talk to us there. But that wraps it up for this topic, which means we can move on to everyone's favorite topic or segment, Gut Check.
Good check.
Gut check.
Morgan
Gut
bringing the energy as
check.
always. Much appreciated.
As always.
So
I
I've
have
got
standards
I'm gonna go into my Gut Check secret ×2 hush emoji no peeking folder on our Discord server to pull out my Gut Check. Unfortunately, I think this was spoiled by everyone because they disregarded that it said no peeking and peeked anyway.
Okay, all right. Here's what
Yeah.
Well, notifications just start popping up on my phone about, I don't know, something about a ketchup bottle. All right, and then I muted the channel that it was coming from.
Okay.
So anything past ketchup bottle is good
Yeah,
game.
honestly, Linda, this is kind of on you for not giving
Yeah.
us a chance to mute
or
the
really just
channel
giving us
before
advance
we put
notice at all.
secrets in it.
Or just putting the channel anywhere in the server at all.
Anyway, this week's Gut Check is something I was pondering very, very seriously while enjoying a meal. And that is, which mayo is the best mayo? And this is, I listed some options of chipotle mayo, garlic mayo, or sriracha mayo. I mean, I guess you could say regular mayo, but you're a lunatic if you say that.
Garlic mayo isn't really a mayo, though, right? It's more of
It's
an
an
aioli.
aioli. No,
Yeah.
whatever, man. Shut up. No one asked you.
You literally
Except
did.
I literally did.
You
Yeah.
literally did.
But yeah, what's the best mayonnaise?
Before anyone says vanilla mayo, they don't mean mayo mixed with vanilla. They just mean
When you said
It's
vanilla
actually mayo.
I processed in my mind the idea of adding vanilla extract to mayonnaise, and now I want to know what it tastes like. Probably terrible. Yeah, it
regrets.
sounds super gross.
Vile.
But what if it just tastes like vanilla frosting, dude? It definitely doesn't.
it could shore up both of their weaknesses.
Definitely
Yeah.
doesn't.
Yeah.
Who knows?
There's vinegar in mayo, and that's
cares
gonna
about
put a
card
damper
quality?
on
Let's
your
talk
whole
about
vanilla
condiment
frosting
quality.
theory.
Exactly.
Okay.
I mean, can you really describe the
okay.
quality of condiments individually? They sort of have to be put together onto a dish to really describe the
My definition
condiment quality
works
of
in the
it.
same way. You know?
And realistically, in every dish, you should be striving for maximum condiment quality,
Yes.
right? It's not.
Exactly. This was infinite foresight by
Um,
me when I made this Gut Check before we knew the episode topic.
Nice.
Okay, I'm gonna take a stand in that it's definitely not sriracha mayo.
it's not like super
Because-
applicable.
It's just not a meaningful
Or
improvement
mayo,
over
yeah.
sriracha and mayo. No, or both of them separately. Like, it's very easy if you want to add sriracha to a dish. Whereas, like, if you want to add chipotle, that's like, you have to do that when you're cooking it,
I agree
right?
with what you're saying. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
So I guess I'll go with chipotle.
No.
I
You
think
don't have to choose strictly from those options.
No,
right?
you can pick whatever mayo you want. Yeah.
Yeah, good.
I think I'll go. I was about to
Although
say,
you're that
I,
good.
I think
That's
I think
good.
I think I'm going bougie with a truffle aioli, aka truffle garlic mayo.
Jesus, you
Yeah.
guys. Alright, I'm going mustard mayo.
Mustard
Whoa.
mayo.
No, that's
Really?
good. Yeah, some Dijon mustard with the mayonnaise. No, it's
Just
different.
put
It lightens
mustard
it up,
on it.
dude. It lightens it up, dude.
No, but I'm saying you could just put mustard
Yeah, but
and
you
mayonnaise.
don't.
Yeah,
It's like you could just put raw garlic and mayonnaise on a thing, but you don't want to bite into the raw
You could
garlic.
Just put sriracha and
No,
mayo
but-
on a sandwich.
Right, but
I don't understand.
wait, but you don't want to bite into a sandwich with mayonnaise?
No,
and
I'm saying that the
mustard on it?
mustard when it's all clumped together and not mixed in with the mayonnaise, it can be too strong for what you're going for. Certainly. Oh,
Just
my
don't.
Shit, dude. I thought I was confident going in. I was like, I was actually a bit torn. I was like chipotle mayo, garlic mayo. I kind of like both of these. But dude, truffle mayo and mustard mayo. That's some. I wasn't prepared.
Didn't even put it on the list.
Can
wasn't
we?
prepared.
Do you consider burger sauce a mayo derivative?
Heck is burger sauce?
Like the classic, like pickle juice
Like-
plus mustard plus ketchup.
Oh, Big
plus
Mac,
mayo.
Big Mac sauce.
No, it's just that's just the general burger sauce. Yeah,
Sauce of
Is that a
burger.
mayo? No.
it has mayo in it.
Okay, if it has mayo in it, then sure, right? Then it's like a type of. Oh, actually, that's a good question.
See,
when
that's
does
what
it
I'm
stop
saying.
becoming
Yeah,
a mayo?
exactly.
Right? Like,
This
How
is what
much-
the question was.
When does it
yeah.
stop becoming a mayo?
Back to the
It
ship
can't
of
be
Theseus.
pullable.
How much mayonnaise can you remove and still have it be a mayo? Okay, I've dilly dallied long enough.
This is the content our listeners.
I'm putting my.
stand for.
I'm gonna go and say the truffle mayo as well. That shit is divine.
Okay.
What is this?
Okay,
We're
I'm
not gonna
differentiating
have a
truffle
full
aioli
kit.
and truffle mayo though in the
Sure,
chat
then I'll go
and
with whatever
Discord.
you said. Aioli.
Oh my
The
god.
truffle aioli. I'm stealing it. That's fine. That's allowed in gut
Just
check.
a band.
I know Reed is going to be upset
Yeah,
because
it's-
he
dude,
wants to
it's
pull it,
totally-
and all
it's
of us
totally-
have different
it's-
answers.
It's totally allowed if you're boring.
But listen, I'm
Okay,
trying to
so-
win gut checks. we've been tallying our gut
I'm
checks.
pretty sure you've already you've lost yourself gut checks for like the next 2 years at least.
Yeah, but I'm trying to make a comeback, and I'm gonna pick the
but
winning
you're not
racehorse.
But you're
I'm
not gonna make
I'm
a
not gonna
comeback
pick
if
the
you
losing
pick the
horse
same
just
thing
because,
as somebody else
just to
that
be
wins.
different.
But no, but if you want to win, if you have to make the comeback, and you do have to make the comeback, I do want to remind you. I'm gonna keep reminding you of this. You have to pick something different that people are going to agree with more.
Yeah, he's got a point, because now if you're already behind, scoring the same number of points as Reed every time.
No,
is
but
a
I'm not
guaranteed
scoring the
loss,
same
right?
as him every time. I might. It's only when I think he's got a winning thing, or it could be you guys.
Oh wait,
It
no,
could be either.
no, hold up,
Oh,
hold up.
So he's just the
I
worst
just
kind of
realized
coward.
this is really bad because this means that I'm being cursed by Lyndon picking the same thing as me because this is an indication that I'm in the wrong.
Fine. Okay, this is true desperation. Okay, I'm Reed. That's it. I'm changing my answer. Okay, my new answer is just mayo. But I'm also gonna beg everyone who's listening to vote for mine, so I can win the gut
It's
check.
clout mayo.
Yeah, it's clout mayo. Yeah, put that. That's it. Clout mayo. Okay, that's it. That's my answer. Send it. Also, if you guys going back, just go vote on all my stuff again. Like go upvote all my answers. That'd be huge. Thanks. Okay, moving on.
I
I can't believe Lyndon lets everyone answering the gut check polls wrong get to him so
good.
much.
I wouldn't be surprised if this is your best
She's
scoring
just-
poll, but this clout idea is gonna wear off quickly.
I definitely can't go back to this well. I can't next episode also ask for like clout ketchup or whatever the hell I pick for the gut check. Also, I have a tremendous advantage.
I mean, we all
I have a
know
tremendous
that's a
advantage
lie,
in gut
right?
checks in terms of like I know what they're gonna be. Well, okay, that's a lie. I don't pre-plan them, but I have the opportunity to pre-plan them, and
You just refuse
and kind of
to
like
take that
think
advantage.
the best answers, you know. But
And you
because I'm trying
still
to
don't
level
do
the playing
wild.
field, okay.
Truly wild.
Anyway,
man, I'm gonna
moving
start
on
your
to
secret
listener
gut check.
questions. So this listener question comes to us from Slump, and Slump asks, "What criteria does it take for you to consider cutting Chrome Mox or Mox Diamond?"
So
Well, I said this in the pre-show, but I feel like this is two different
it is.
because I think
It is, yeah.
I'm also I think I might okay. I'm gonna make this call, and if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right. I think I'm the only person on this podcast
You're
who has
wrong.
willingly cut a Mox Diamond from a CDH deck.
Lol, that's definitely not true. I cut Mox Diamond from several decks, and
Oh,
and
okay.
friend of the show,
Yeah, never
Zach
mind.
Z Wells. I know he's listening to this episode in his car right now. Hey, Zach. He will attest that I've been shilling for him to cut Mox Diamond from Thrasios Timna. I think Mox
Okay,
Diamond is
well, I mean,
extremely
that's
cuttable
just wrong.
because the worst land in your hand is often way better than the worst spell in your hand, especially from Chrome Mox to Mox Diamond directly. But people go way too light on lands. Like they'll mulligan for their hands down to 5 to look for the right amount of lands. Then they'll keep a hand with Mox Diamond, and they'll get like. So I'm not saying cut Mox Diamond from every CDH deck, obviously, but I'm saying there are decks, especially if you're trying to take the game long, where and it's not in every long game deck either, but where cutting Mox Diamond is generally, I think, the right move. And just hitting your land drops, not going card minus if you have nothing like really strong to power out. That's I'm definitely pro cutting Mox Diamond from decks.
I mean, I think it's definitely important to realize Mox Diamond is only mana ramp until you miss your first
Exactly.
land drop. And I think that does often sort of get lost in the discussions around it. Whereas like Chrome Mox, if you exile a card that doesn't make mana, does mean you're up a mana for the whole game. Which I think leads to different sorts of reasons why you might cut Chrome Mox.
I think one thing that not underselling, but basically you haven't touched on yet is how big of a difference it is to play a turn 1 versus turn 2 Remora, or a turn 2 versus turn 3 Rhystic Study, and then like those are the two best. But any sort of early value engine, like stealing a turn or like cheating on a turn by discarding a card, just seems like
It
insane.
certainly does, but I don't want to trade. Like if Mox Diamond is on average just putting me down a card, and then it's no longer ramp once I miss my first land drop, and I'm trying to play a deck where I'm trying to hit a bunch of my land drops, especially in something like TNT where you have an actual good mana sink, right? Then and if you're playing a more control-y build and not like some kind of like weird turbo build, then yeah, like I'm fine to cut Mox Diamond and not put it in just for the odd case where I can draw into my turn 2 Rhystic Study or something. Like you already have cards that can accelerate you into that, like your dorks, right? So it's I'm way more like I'll also like cut Mox Diamond. I was trying to think if there's a scenario where I'd cut Chrome Mox before Mox Diamond, and I don't really think there is.
Oh, there are tons, or I would.
Okay, well, what are some I'd be interested to hear?
So first of all, I would say the thing about TNT though is that like you can make your land drops a lot easier, especially if you're, say, getting your card advantage engines online a turn earlier. So I actually don't think that TNT is like a particularly good candidate for cutting Mox Diamond, especially like the high color decks. The any color flexibility can be really nice. With Chrome Mox, the reason you cut it is for colors. Where you have a deck, like for a while I didn't play it in Hullen because basically I didn't need it to make green. The deck way overproduces green, and I never had a white or a blue card that I wanted to exile. Like, so basically I was looking at a card that was like, in order to help me cast the cards I want to cast, I'd have to exile.
But you're still running Mox Diamond?
Yeah.
That's interesting because
Yeah,
I think Hullen
similar
additionally has the
deal.
synergy where having lands in hand is actually like decent. right? Like get
Sure, but also getting your 5-mana commander down a turn earlier.
which is why I'm surprised. Like I mean, Chrome Mox, Holland has generic costs in it. I don't know.
Sure.
I see where you're coming from, but I guess I'd more personally disagree.
Like I to be clear, I now play Chrome Mox in Holland,
Okay.
but I had it not in there for a while. And I think that like I'm not necessarily sure like what other deck specifically I would think of cutting it from. It would probably be a green deck that was playing Oof, that was higher in colors, but still very centralized on green. So maybe like some stuff in Teamer, where the majority of the mana you're producing is green, the majority of your costs are green, but not quite as disproportionate, and you're often only going to have like one or two either blue or red cards, which I think just makes it like very awkward a lot of the time. And also the thing with Holland is that you also like, yes, having extra lands in hand is good, but so is having extra dorks, right?
Sure.
Like pitching a dork under Holland is actually like, or sorry, under a Chrome Mox in Holland is like kind of a -2, because not only is it now gone, you don't get to play it, it also doesn't get you a trigger.
What's your creature density? Like, is there... So, I mean, the example I was saying, the worst land in your hand is often better than the worst spell. Obviously, in Holland, your worst spell probably isn't going to be a dork, as you're pointing out.
But, like, my worst spell is some irrelevant... It's like, the deck is, like, combo pieces, a little bit of interaction, tutors, and creatures. So, like, some creature is going to be my worst card in hand, which means I also get a trigger if I get to cast it.
Sure. Yeah, that's a fair point. And I guess, I guess I don't know. I still kind of stand by the Mox Diamond thing and the point that you had made, which is, it's only ramp until you miss your first land drop, and then in Holland, certainly, missing land drops can be rough. But I did want to address the so that's whatever. But I wanted to address the point you'd said about Thrasios Tymna at the start of kind of your discussion here, which was that it can be used to kind of power out your value engines. So presumably by that you mean your commanders, right? Like your Tymna, and then kind of recouping your cards there. Is it like, if you're going turn one? So the biggest thing that I could see that doing is really like, because I mean, you're often trying to play some kind of ramp on turn one, right? Be that a dork, whatever.
You swing the biggest thing
is you get one turn earlier of a swing, right? Off of Tymna.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, or you could also go, like, instead of ramp, you could go turn 1 Thras, turn 2 Tymna, and then start getting into Thras instead of like a dork or something.
And do remember that, like, the earlier you land a Tymna, like, it's like exponentially better, especially in Thras Tymna, where like you don't actually necessarily play good attackers. You're just sort of relying on people not playing blockers or things that they're willing to block with. So getting a Tymna down a turn earlier than usual is like exponentially better, because it means that you get like at least another turn, if not more, worth of cards.
So then, if that's something you're super interested in, why not run something like a Jeweled Lotus?
There is actually an argument to run Jeweled Lotus. The other argument for Chrome Mox is that it gives you more explosive Thrasios activations. So like if you're drawing a bunch of cards off of Tymna and Thrasios, it's nice to be able to convert those cards into actions on that same turn, because otherwise you don't actually have that much fast mana in the deck, so you're not actually converting those draws into actions as quickly, because you have to play out the dorks and then wait an entire turn cycle and then be able to play out the gas from your hand. Or you're playing out the gas from your hand and you can't play the dorks out, which is typically why Thrasios Tymna gets stuck with dorks in hands and like late game a lot of the time. Why you play Force of Vigor in those decks, because like you have issues converting card draw directly into game actions. Which is the reason why there's a lot of fast mana in specifically Curious Control, because that deck can draw a lot of cards, but it's also playing a very reactive shell, and you couldn't necessarily like actually do much with a lot of those cards with that additional fast mana. So like stuff like Mox Amber and such.
Unsurprisingly, fast mana is good at powering out things faster than usual when you want to cast something or do something powerful, right? Like you're willing to trade off the card disadvantage because you're gonna get down a card engine that helps you recoup that faster. So
Lyndon, I'm gonna have to ask you to tone it down. This isn't a hot takes episode.
Yeah. Any Matt? Morgan, anyone else? Or Reed, sorry. I guess Morgan, you gave your thing on Chromox, Mox Diamond. No?
No.
Okay. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. If you guys would like to reach out to us, if you guys would like to reach us, no, it is reach out. Oh my god, it's been too long. If you guys would like to reach out to us with any questions, comments, or concerns, you can contact us on Twitter at Into the North Pod, via our email, intothenorthpodcast@gmail.com, or on our Discord server, the invite link for which can be found in the description for this episode. An extra special thanks to all of our patrons who help cover the expenses for our show and allow us to work towards improving the quality of the podcast. If you too would like to become a patron, we are at patreon.com/IntoNorthPodcast. Another way you can support us is via our TCG Player affiliate link. So anytime you want to purchase something from TCG Player, if you use our affiliate link, which is in the podcast/YouTube description, a portion of your purchase goes towards supporting the podcast. Thank you as always to the band Vox Cadre for our lovely podcast music, to Nate Slubber for our equally lovely podcast logo, and to our video editor, Manta Ray Hat. The next episode will be out in 2 weeks. Until then, see ya.
Bye.